Right now, somewhere in a NASA laboratory, engineers are solving a problem that no one in human history has ever had to solve before. And the answer they come up with over the next few years will determine whether America or China becomes the first civilization to permanently occupy another world. And here is the part that most people do not realize. We are not talking about planting a flag and coming home. We are talking about building an actual city on the moon with roads, power plants, pressurized vehicles, nuclear reactors, and rotating crews of people who will live and work there for months at a time. And the timeline for all of this is not some distant science fiction fantasy. It starts in 2026, which means the most ambitious construction project in the history of our species is already underway. So let's break down exactly how NASA plans to pull this off, because the details are simultaneously more practical and more insane than anything you have probably imagined. The story really begins with a question that sounds almost too simple. We're on the moon. Are we actually going to build this thing? Because the moon is not just one place any more than Earth is just one place. And the answer to that question changes everything else about how this whole plan works. Every single Apollo landing happened near the lunar equator. Nice flat terrain, easy communication with Earth, safe and predictable. But the lunar South Pole is an entirely different world. It is a landscape of ancient craters, jagged mountain ridges, and valleys so deep that sunlight has not touched the ground there in billions of years. And that eternal darkness is precisely why NASA has targeted 13 specific sites around the South Pole for the Artemis program, because hiding inside those permanently shadowed craters is something so valuable it could sustain an entire civilization. Frozen water ice deposited there over billions of years by passing asteroids and comets. Water that can be split into oxygen to breathe and hydrogen to use as rocket fuel, meaning the moon could one day become a fueling station for the entire solar system. But before any of that can happen, before a single habitat goes up or a single drop of water gets extracted, NASA has to solve a problem so basic and so frustrating that it nearly derailed the Apollo missions 50 years ago. And that problem is dust. Lunar dust is nothing like the dust you find on your bookshelf. Each particle is microscopically sharp, jagged like broken glass at the molecular level, because unlike dust on Earth, it has never been smoothed by wind or water or any kind of erosion. It just sits there on the surface, getting bombarded by solar radiation and cosmic rays for billions of years, building up an electrostatic charge that makes it cling to absolutely everything it touches. During the Apollo missions, it cut through the outer layers of spacesuits, scratched helmet visors, clogged the radiators on the Lunar rover, and nearly caused it to overheat. And when Apollo 12 landed 180 meters away from a probe called Surveyor 3 that had already been sitting on the lunar surface for years, astronauts discovered that the probe had been essentially sandblasted by dust kicked up from the landing engines from that distance. Which means if you have a moon base where rockets are landing and taking off constantly, where rovers are driving around all day, where astronauts are walking back and forth on the surface, you have a dust catastrophe in the making that could destroy equipment and endanger lives within weeks. So the very first thing you have to build before anything else is roads. And this is where the engineering gets genuinely creative. One short-term solution already in use by the US military is a spray-on binding agent that soldiers have used in desert environments to stabilize dirt roads and helicopter landing pads. It essentially glues loose particles together into a solid surface, and it works. But it means shipping a chemical compound from Earth to the moon, which is expensive and ultimately unsustainable, and introduces microplastics into a pristine extraterrestrial environment. So the more elegant and long-term solution is to simply melt the lunar surface using concentrated sunlight through a Fresnel lens, which is a flat piece of grooved clear plastic that focuses light the way a magnifying glass does, but without the bulk and weight of a curved lens. At the lunar South Pole, where the sun rides low on the horizon and the shadows are long, This lens would need to be just under 2.5 meters wide, and the European Space Agency has already been experimenting with this concept using simulated lunar dust and powerful lasers, melting the particles into a solid glass-like surface that could form roads, landing pads, largage, and construction zones. The downside is that it is slow. Their estimates suggest building a 100 square meter landing pad with this method would take about 115 days, which is roughly 100 times slower than paving a road with asphalt on Earth. But when you consider that you have basically unlimited solar energy and an unlimited supply of raw material directly beneath your feet, slow starts to look like acceptable. And once those roads exist, the moon base begins to take shape in a way that becomes genuinely exciting to think about, because now you need vehicles to drive on them. And the most important vehicle in the entire operation is something that Toyota and the Japanese Space Agency have been developing for years. A pressurized rover, sometimes called the Lunar Cruiser, that functions essentially like a mobile apartment. It can support 2 astronauts in shirt-sleeve comfort for up to 30 days at a time without ever requiring them to suit up, powered by hydrogen fuel cells and capable of covering enormous distances across the lunar surface, meaning the crew can live inside it like an RV while exploring areas hundreds of kilometers from the main base. And this matters because the most scientifically valuable and resource-rich locations on the moon are often in the most dangerous and inaccessible terrain. Deep crater edges, steep mountain slopes, permanently shadowed valleys that have never once seen the light of the sun, places that no human has ever seen up close, and to reach the places even the pressurized rover cannot go. NASA has developed something that sounds like it belongs in a science fiction film, but is completely real. They are called rocket drones. NASA calls the program Moonfall. They are based on the same platform as the Ingenuity helicopter that flew on Mars, except instead of propellers, they use small rocket thrusters to hop across the surface. Each drone can cover up to 50 kilometers in a single 150-second flight, which means NASA can send these machines into the deepest and most treacherous parts of the lunar South Pole to gather data, scout terrain, and locate resources before risking any human lives. And all of it, the drones, the rovers, the vehicles on the surface, will be equipped with high-quality cameras, streaming live footage back to Earth in real time at 500 megabits per second through a new network of lunar communication satellites, meaning every single person on the planet will be able to watch this unfold in real time. Which brings us to the question of how you actually house the people who are doing all of this work, and this is where the plan breaks into 3 distinct phases that stretch all the way from 2026 to the early 2030s and beyond. Phase 1 runs from 2026 to 2028, and it is essentially a proof of concept at an enormous scale. NASA plans to send 25 missions to the moon in just 3 years, 21 of which will be actual lunar landings, and this begins with the Artemis 2 mission launching as early as February 2026, which will be the first time human beings have traveled to the vicinity of the moon in over 50 years. 4 astronauts aboard the Orion spacecraft on a 10-day journey that takes them around the far side of the moon on a free return trajectory. So meaning, if anything goes wrong, the physics of gravity will simply bring them home without any additional engine burns. This is a test flight, first and foremost, testing docking procedures, radiation shielding, life support, communication systems, all the human factors that could not be evaluated without actual people on board. And then Artemis 3 will take the next step, not a moon landing as was originally planned, but a rendezvous and docking exercise in low Earth orbit where the Orion crew meets up with the lunar lander for the first time, practicing the transfer procedures and testing the lander systems in a place where rescue is possible if something fails. And this is a critically important change from the old plan, because the old plan would have skipped this step entirely and sent people straight from an Orion test flight to an untested landing on the moon using a vehicle that had never carried humans before, which is the kind of schedule pressure that historically leads to catastrophic outcomes. So instead, the new NASA under Administrator Jared Isaacman has restructured the entire timeline around the principle that you verify before you trust, and then you move fast once you have verified. And the goal is to have boots on the lunar surface at the South Pole by 2028, with a second landing following within months, because NASA has set a tempo of one crewed lunar landing every 6 months going forward, which matches the pace they maintained during the Apollo era between 1969 and 1972. And running alongside all of this is the Viper rover, which has been sitting in a warehouse waiting for a ride to the moon for years and will finally launch in 2027 aboard a Blue Origin lander to begin mapping confirmed water ice deposits and other volatile resources at the South Pole, laying the groundwork for everything that comes next. Phase 2 runs from 2029 to 2032, and this is when the moon stops being a destination and starts becoming a place where people work. 27 launches, 24 landings, the first permanent habitation infrastructure going into the ground, excavation rovers that can move rock and level terrain and dig trenches for power cables and pipelines, the construction of the first pressurized habitat modules, and a massive scale-up of power generation capability, because power is the single most important resource for everything else you want to do on the moon. And the fundamental challenge with power on the moon is the length of the lunar day, which lasts 2 Earth weeks followed by 2 Earth weeks of total darkness, during which temperatures plunge to below -200 degrees Celsius, cold enough to destroy most electronics and freeze any liquid in any system solid. The hardware that has been sent to the moon by various space agencies in recent years has mostly just died during lunar night and never recovered, so solar power alone is not sufficient for a permanent installation. You need something that keeps generating heat and electricity around the clock regardless of whether the sun is up, and the answer is nuclear energy. These specifically nuclear fission reactors small enough to be launched aboard a rocket but powerful enough to supply an entire base. NASA has been developing what they call the Fission Surface Power Project, a reactor that has to weigh under 6 metric tons and fit within roughly the size of an average automobile, which for a nuclear power plant is extraordinarily compact. Companies like Rolls-Royce, which has been building nuclear reactors for British Royal Navy submarines for over 60 years, are leading development of micro-reactor designs targeting between 50 and 100 kilowatts of output, enough to power a small factory or several houses on Earth. And you can stack multiple units to scale up the power supply as the base grows. During the darkest and coldest lunar nights, these reactors will keep the lights on. You keep the electronics alive, keep the water from freezing and the habitat warm, and keep the equipment ready to work the moment conditions allow. In the shadowed craters at the South Pole, they can run indefinitely without risk of overheating because the ambient temperature is already close to absolute zero. It is genuinely one of the few situations in engineering where the most hostile environment is simultaneously the most convenient for your cooling requirements. By the end of Phase 2, the infrastructure for sustained human presence will be in place, and then Phase 3 begins in 2033, and this is where the word city starts to feel less like a metaphor and more like a literal description. Rotating crews of 4 astronauts living on the moon for 28-day stretches in connected pressurized habitat modules. Essentially a space station but built on solid ground, supplied with approximately 8,000 kilograms of food, water, and air every single month. And this is where NASA begins what they call in situ resource utilization, which is the technical phrase for living off the land. Water extracted from the ice in the shadowed craters gets split into breathable oxygen and usable hydrogen fuel. The lunar soil gets melted and processed into a pourable material that can be 3D printed into the first genuinely permanent structures, walls and floors and ceilings made entirely from the moon itself, not shipped from Earth at enormous expense, but built on site from resources that have been sitting there waiting for billions of years. And China is pursuing exactly the same strategy with their own moon base program, doing already testing bricks made from 5 different simulated lunar soil compositions, experimenting with different heating methods to turn regolith into solid structural material. And in 2024, they transported a batch of these test bricks to the Tiangong space station and placed them on an external rack where they are spending 3 years being exposed to the vacuum of space, cosmic radiation, and extreme temperature swings to see how well they hold up under real conditions. They also have a concept called the Moon Pot Vessel, an egg-shaped habitat structure built by robots using traditional construction techniques adapted for the lunar environment combined with 3D printing. And it is this parallel development, 2 of the most powerful nations on Earth racing to put permanent human infrastructure on another world at the same time. Gokiji Mekis, that gives the Artemis program its urgency and its meaning, because this is not the space race of the 1960s where the prize was prestige and the winner got bragging rights. The prize this time is access to resources that could fuel civilization beyond Earth for centuries, water ice that can become rocket propellant, rare earth metals that can support advanced manufacturing, a gravitational position that makes launching spacecraft into the deeper solar system dramatically cheaper and more efficient than launching from Earth. Whoever establishes a permanent and defensible presence at the lunar South Pole first shapes the rules of everything that comes after. And that is why NASA, under its new leadership, has explicitly rejected the slow incremental approach that produced years of beautiful plans and almost no actual hardware in orbit or on the surface. The new philosophy is execution over perfection, competition over consensus, and speed over caution, wherever caution is not genuinely warranted. And if that philosophy holds and the hardware performs and the schedule stays anywhere close to what has been laid out, then somewhere around 2033 there will be 4 human beings sitting inside a pressurized habitat on the surface of the moon, eating a meal and looking out a window at the stars, not as visitors, not as explorers on a brief excursion, but as residents, the first permanent inhabitants of another world in the history of our species. And the reason that matters more than any specific technical achievement is what it proves. It proves that the boundary between Earth and everywhere else is no longer fixed, that the question is no longer whether humans can survive beyond this planet, but simply how far and how fast we choose to go. And the answer to that question depends on whether the generation of kids watching rocket launches and rover footage and live streams from the lunar surface right now feels the same thing that a generation felt in 1969 when the whole world stopped to watch 2 men walk on the moon. Because the greatest technology NASA will ever build is not a nuclear reactor or a pressurized habitat or a rocket drone. It is the ambition of a child who grows up believing that the impossible is just a problem that nobody has solved yet.